Why, hello there, everybody. It's Philosophical Jew. Welcome back. I don't know whether this will be the first video released after I start uploading because I have a few more recorded. Brief synopsis: I have been recording videos. I've decided to take the podcast in a different direction, more of an interview style, but the actual videos will be, sort of multifaceted. I'm going to do some reactions like this. I'm going to do some interviews for the actual podcast on the topics I touch on in the Substack. The Substack is a blog platform. It's going strong. Thankfully, hundreds of subscribers. I'm very fortunate. And, the YouTube channel has been a bit slow. That's on me. But I'm, full-time job, trying to do what I need to do and trying to be focused on work. And this is sort of something I do on the side, and I can't promise consistency, but I'm excited about this because I finally figured out how to do these reaction videos. So this is not my video. This is from JLI, Jewish Learning Institute. I'm going to try to react to it. I have a very nuanced view of Jewish readings of the Torah. I think it's actually closer to the traditional view, of course, but I'm sure everyone says that. But I personally think that it's a valid view. I think it's Maimonidean. I think it's Gaonic. I think it has a strong basis in the tradition. So I've done a few videos responding to Alex O'Connor on the atheist side, and I figured, I'm not going to pretend that I'm just going to be completely unbiased in everything that I do. So let's see what I think of a Jewish voice on these matters. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, by the way, this is actually my first time seeing this video. I've never watched this before, so it might be a bad idea, but we'll see. Let's do it.
According to the Torah's tradition, the age of the universe is approximately 6,000 years old, 5,785 to be exact. Science will tell you around 14 billion years. Can both of these seemingly contradictory claims be true? In this series, we will tackle some of the most controversial issues between Torah and science. Throughout the series, we will be joined by Rabbi Yechiel Krish. This is Faith Meets Fact.
I gotta hand it to their team. They're doing a great job on the graphics. Like, that was fun. I enjoyed that. Okay. I'm just going to do something really quickly. I want to see, before I get too upset about things or happy about things, I want to look up who this is. Rabbi Yechiel Krish. Okay. Krish. So who is he? I don't know why I use Bing. I know. I have no idea why I do that. Okay, that's promising. Whoops, don't know what just happened there. Apologies for that. Okay, let's see what we got here. What's this podcast? What's his background? Before I get to... lest I come in here with a colored view, which I for sure do. Who doesn't? Let's see. Wow, okay. Alright. He's not... I'm sort of skeptical about the Chabad rabbinic ordination, not because I have anything against Chabad, but because that usually indicates less of a rationalistic approach to the questions when it comes to Torah and science. I actually happen to enjoy some of the mystical perspectives on the Torah, but I can't lie where I'm going to have to say that I think that interpretation should be more rational than not. Theology is a whole different field, so I'm less intense over there. But he seems to have a good background. Okay. All right, let's see.
The very first words of the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Ever since then, everyone's been...
So I'm confused because he said in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but in the image they chose, it's in the beginning of God's creation of heaven and earth. That's actually a very big theological difference. I'm not sure why they did that. Let me hear. Did I hear that right?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
That's why would they? Unless they purposely did this. Maybe I'm just overreacting way too quickly. Let me continue.
Since then, everyone's been asking, when exactly was this beginning? And the answers differ drastically. So how do we get around this problem? Let's now turn to Rabbi Yechiel Krish, a leading expert on all things science and Torah, to take us through some possible reconciliation.
Whenever we're trying to resolve science-Torah problems, we really only have 4 approaches available to us. The first approach is to twist the Torah into a knot and say that whatever it says in the verses should be taken less literally or not literally at all. Now, sometimes that approach might be valid depending on the context, but the problem here is that the word that the Torah is using when Hashem describes making the world, is that he created the world in 6 days, the Hebrew word being yom, that Hashem created the world in 6 yoms. Now, a yom is usually a 24-hour period. We would have to twist the Torah here for the word yom to mean something beyond a 24-hour period, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years, and at some point the word yom loses all meaning. But the real problem with this approach is that later on in the Torah, by the 10 Commandments, when God gives the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, he introduces the idea of keeping Shabbat. And Shabbat is supposed to be kept because we are supposed to copy God exactly the way that he did things. According to the Torah, the verse reads, you should keep Shabbat, you should work on 6 days and rest on the 7th, because I worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th. The word used there is yom once again. So God is saying to us, I want you to copy me exactly. Do exactly what I did. I worked for 6 24-hour periods and rested on the 7th 24-hour period. You should do exactly the same thing and work for 6 24-hour periods and rest on the 7th. If we are to say that when God made the world, these initial days were longer than 24-hour periods, Shabbat is going to come once every couple billion years. Your cholent is going to get very, very cold. So it's not going to work. We can't honestly give an approach here that would imply that the Torah doesn't really mean 24-hour periods. Fact is, the Torah seems convinced, textually speaking, that God made the world in 6 literal days and rested on a 7th literal day. So we're stuck. We're unable to twist the Torah, at least not in an honest way, which brings us to the second.
What? No, that's totally false. So many premises he's working with here. I'm honestly a little bit shocked. I was not expecting to have this much of a disagreement right away. He makes the claim that God wants us to follow him exactly, to copy him exactly, rather. I'll say that. If you've ever learned Maimonides, who's quite the Jewish figurehead for philosophy and theology, you'll know that there is just a categorical difference between God and humans. So this isn't an issue because God obviously didn't work either. God doesn't work. What does work mean for God? It's not the same. It would be a different category. The rest for God would be a different category. Does God ever sweat? Does he have sweat coming from his brow? What even is this approach? I guess I'm getting a little fired up. I'm sorry. I truly did not expect that. There's also a lot of false premises. Like he's saying that if you translate yom, day, as a literal 24-hour period in one place, you would have to translate it the same way in a different place. But that's not true. The Torah is full of contronyms. A contronym is a word which has 2 opposite meanings. So for example, the word yirdu. The word yirdu means to rule over or to be subservient to. This is used in the Torah when it's written that man yirdu ala behema, that man will be, I don't remember if those are the exact Hebrew terms, I apologize. But I know yirdu is there, and this is the idea that man will be yirdu over animals. And the classical commentator, who is by no means, in my understanding, a rationalist, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, he says explicitly that yirdu, why was that word used? Because it can either mean that man, when he acts nobly, in a noble manner, he will be greater than animals, or man, when he acts less noble, when he acts animalistic by nature, he will be less than an animal. So he'll be subservient to, he'll be yirdu, or he'll be better than, he'll be more noble, urdu, than an animal. So this is just a terrible premise for, I'm sorry, I'm being so harsh. I'm not sure if this is truly, if this is truly like, I'm trying to be respectful. I really am. But the premises here, I think you must admit, are flawed. It's not also, the whole Torah is essentially a book where you twist and turn, right? Like there's an oral tradition which definitely stretches the bounds of what we view the Torah as, right? By most calculations in a literal reading of the Torah, there's just so many things you would not be able to do had it not been for the sages, and vice versa. There would be so many things you are able to do had it not been for the sages as well. So I'm not sure why this approach is immediately shut down by him. I truly don't understand it. And translating, it's not a matter of translating Yom Day as epic, or as periods of millions of years. It's a matter of understanding the story as a parable or a representation as symbolism and allegory. Those are two vitally different things, by the way. But it's not about taking the Torah and every word literally. Literal truth is not the only truth that is out there. Anyone trained in classical philosophy knows this. Truth is a very rocky playing field, and it's actually quite complicated. So I'm sorry if I've shown my true colors already. I have no secrets that I am a rationalist and that I don't understand this. I understand it. I just don't subscribe to this approach at all. All right, let's move on, I guess.
Approach. The second approach is that we can twist the science. So if we wanted to twist the science to make the Torah science problem here work with the age of the universe, we would have to cast doubt on the scientific findings that are claiming that the world that we are living in right now is a couple billion years old. That's not entirely difficult to do. Even scientists aren't really quite sure exactly how old the world or the universe is. The gold standard of science is prospective research, where we can look at something now and test what it will be doing in the future. Obviously, that sort of research is not possible when you think about a multi-billion-year-old frame of reference. It's very difficult to go back in time 4 billion years and see exactly how things played out. In addition to that, the basic science surrounding the age of the universe commits what is known as a logical fallacy within science itself. I'll give an example of this. It's known as the antecedent consequent fallacy. If I have a ice cube on the table in front of me, and I want to make a scientific prediction about what will happen to that ice cube in the next 1 hour, I can say with fair certainty that that ice cube is going to turn into a puddle of water. And that's good science, because I have something in front of me, I have reason to suspect that it will go in that direction, and so when it turns into a puddle of water, I've confirmed my hypothesis. On the other hand, if I have a puddle of water in front of me, and I want to try to figure out what that puddle of water was before it became a puddle of water, claiming it was an ice cube is somewhat outrageous. There are multiple different ways this puddle of water could have come to be. Similarly, when I take a look at the world around me right now and claim that because of how things look today, that must mean that a certain process played out over the course of billions of years in the past, I am making a logical fallacy that science is usually not comfortable making. It's fair to say that the science behind the age of the universe and the age of the world would not pass muster in a traditional clinical trial or meet any particular standard that we generally set around scientific findings. It's science, but it certainly isn't the best that science has to offer. So is it possible to twist the science? Yeah, it's possible, but once again, not my favorite approach because of how much we rely on science in our daily lives.
All right, so actually, you might be surprised to know, more of an olive branch here. Same tracks, both of us. Same exact track on this train station, on the subway station. We're taking different trains, though, because his approach is that the scientific methodology with which the age of the universe is calculated is sort of conjectural, right? It's faulty science because we're trying to see into the past with future lenses, in some sense. Like, we're trying to get an idea of a past we haven't seen, and we're trying to use our best... Wow, that was a strange slip up. We're trying to use our best possible methodologies to do so. But the problem with sort of putting that approach to the side. And I think that the method he used to get there is that the science nowadays for the age of the universe, I would have gone with the path that they could be working with false premises about the nature of reality. Donald Hoffman is a very big, and Donald Hoffman writes a lot about this, how consciousness is the fundamental building rock. It is reality. It's not separate from it. And it's not a materialistic plane that we're seeing. There's like a whole layer of universe under what we see, and that we've evolutionarily corrected for, because we wouldn't be able to handle what's in front of us. Right? This sounds very mystical. This is a mathematical approach. I don't understand the math, but I'm telling you what a top tier mathematician has said. I don't think that I agree with the approach that we can't really tell too much about what happened in the past. I mean, the cosmic background radiation and the unbelievably complex mathematical formulas. I'll grant they're based on a lot of assumptions. I'll grant that for sure. But there's no way here to make a 6,000-year-old universe claim. 5,785, it's just not going to happen. Which is why, you crossed out twisting the Torah. But it's not twisting the Torah. It's allowing a tradition. It's allowing the tradition to use the traditional rules we have. One of which, by the way, is Saadia Gaon. Saadia Gaon is an 8th century head of the Babylonian Academy, who essentially writes that if a way that we interpret the verse goes against our reason, we have every right to reinterpret the verse. It needs to be interpreted with reason. Reason is very much of use by Saadia Gaon, and so does Maimonides. Maimonides, in the second volume of the Guide for the Perplexed, additionally makes the claim that were science to conclusively, make us have to reread the Torah in a literal sense. First we accept the Torah, but if the consensus becomes the scientific world, the worldview that just makes the Torah inoperable literally, you'd have to follow the science. And Rav Kook says the same thing. Rav Kook, in his Guide for the Perplexed of the Generation, or his book for the Perplexed of the Generation, in chapter 4, he says the exact same thing. And there's no problem with interpreting it this way. So the twisting the science part, same track, different train, same destination. So I guess this ramble was a little bit for nothing, but that's my take on it.
Third approach is to use Kabbalah, or Jewish mysticism, to blast away the problem entirely by understanding verses on a mystical level. Some Jewish scholars throughout the ages have done this even with the days of creation themselves. One approach is that we actually have been through several versions of this world before, and that the rock we're standing on right now has been through 7 different cycles, each one lasting 7,000 years. Now, you might note, those of you who are good at math, that doesn't get us much closer to 4 billion. But there is a verse in Psalms that says that 1 day equals 1,000 years in God's eyes. When you do the math that way, you'll end up with 7 cycles of 7,000 years, and then times 365,000 in order to convert days to God years. That comes out to about 18 billion. That would mean that you would have an 18 billion-year-old world. There are a few problems with using this Jewish mystical approach. The first is that ever since the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, in the mid-16th century, codified Kabbalah into a formal system, it is not allowed for any Jewish mystic to go back to prior mystics that contradict him. That's not permitted anymore because he is the bottom line final decision on Jewish mysticism itself. Rabbi Isaac Luria makes it very clear that the entire idea of there being prior worlds before this world is a spiritual thing and not remotely related to the rock that we're standing on right now. That really is the biggest challenge to this approach. And by the way, Kabbalah doesn't really help us all that much, even if we were to accept a premise of an 18 billion-year-old universe, because you'll recall that the current estimate of the age of the universe, according to science, is 13.7 billion years. And that may sound similar to 18 billion years, but it's off by more than 4 billion. The fourth approach, my personal favorite, is one...
Okay, look, just for the sake, I'm not going to use Kabbalah the way it's used today. I think that it's sort of been completely overturned compared to its traditional original state. Ma'aseh Merkava, totally different in my opinion. There's a whole scholarship on this. There's a scholarly field. If you're interested, I recommend Chacham Faur. He has a book called Anti-Maimonidean Demons. Not a book, I apologize, a paper. It's available online, open source. Total overturn of Kabbalah compared to what it used to be. And the Arizal being the final nail in the coffin of Kabbalah, that's not a Jewish belief. There's no Bezdin on Kabbalah. There's no Jewish court that dictates when Kabbalah is over. We barely even agree on what Kabbalah is. So unless you want to put a stop on all theology post the Arizal, post Lurianic Kabbalah, that is just breathtaking to me. That anyone would say that is unbelievable. I'm fairly certain. Maybe this will get me in too much trouble, so I'm not going to say it. But I'm fairly certain other rabbis who I'm sure this rabbi would approve of have made new theological claims which contradict the Arizal and which definitely don't jive with what the Arizal has written. There's no way around that. It's happening. There is no idea of an inability to overturn a prior theological doctrine. Theological perspective is not. It's not within the realms of Judaism, as far as I'm aware. But additionally, we definitely do have sort of a tradition that there are certain Jewish principles, right? There's foundations that you can't overturn, right? Most people are aware of Maimonides' 13 Principles. There's an entire sefer by the Ra'avad? There's an entire sefer by a Rishon, by a Spanish scholar, I believe. I apologize. It's Rabbi Albo. He has a sefer. You know what? Let me just do this really quickly. La, 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 la. You can look all this up yourself. I'm not making any of this up, but he has a whole book basically questioning a bunch of Maimonides' principles of faith, because was it Rabbi Albo? Or maybe it was the Ra'avad. And he basically says that, according to the Rambam, there are a few sages in the Talmud who would be considered heretics. And that's, so he doesn't agree with that. So there's a lot to say about this, and you could read Rabbi Samuel Liebens' book on the principles of Judaism. The Maimonides certainly didn't think there was a nail on the coffin, as far as I'm aware. All right, I guess I'll have to find that a different time and maybe attach it later. But you know what? Let me try one more thing, guys. Bear with me. Bear with me here, people. Sefer HaIkarim. That's what it was. Thank you, God. Okay, Sefer HaIkarim. Okay. So it was Rabbi Albo. So why wasn't I able to find it? Okay. So Rabbi Albo had this book, Sefer HaIkarim, is the book of principles of Judaism, right? The book of the foundations. In it, he boils down the entirety of Jewish principles to 3 principles. He does not agree with the Rambam's 13. With all respect in the world, Maimonides is a giant still, and I have made extreme respect for Maimonides. But there are principles of Judaism. There's just 3 that it would be difficult to disagree on. To say that there is a cap on Kabbalah and its tradition, it's not even something subject to court ruling. So I'm not sure where that comes from. But let's continue.
One that I like to call synthesis. It's the approach that is championed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it allows us to embrace science while also remaining faithful to a more or less literal reading of the Torah. When we look...
Okay, if he's about to say anything other than a young creationist interpretation, which is what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, I would like to see the source, because I'm pretty sure this is just going to be a young creationist thing where they say that the world is actually 5,785 years old, but it just looks like it's 13.8 billion years old. I'm not a fan. That's twisting reality. That's a whole other issue.
Carefully at Genesis, we find that the story is meant to be expedited to a certain degree. We have a tree that is only a few days old that is bearing fruit, the tree of knowledge. We have Adam and Eve, who are only a few hours old, eating from that tree of knowledge on the 6th day of creation. It's very clear that God intends to tell us that things are moving faster than we might have expected. Now, is it possible that God accomplished billions of years of work in just a few 24-hour periods? Absolutely. God can do anything, and as a matter of fact, in Genesis itself, it looks like God is speeding things up. Let me give you an example that illustrates this point. Let's say that I'm going to take a flight from New York to Florida, and that should take about 2.5 hours. And now let's say that God decides to get me there a lot faster. God can do miracles, he snaps his holy fingers, and I am transported from New York to Florida in exactly 10 minutes. Now that's miraculous. Does that mean that the distance from New York to Florida changed? Or does that mean that I was able to move a lot faster than the normal amount of time it takes to travel from A to B? The distance is the same. When I go back, if a miracle's not done for me on the way back, it's going to take 2.5 hours to get from Florida back to New York. The distance hasn't changed, but I was able to traverse it more quickly. This means that God, within 6 24-hour periods, 6 literal days, did billions of years of work. He's very, very fast. He's able to expedite things. He's able to do miracles. And therefore, when we look back at the earth, we will see evidence of billions of years having passed, even though God only did them in 6 days. The reason why this approach works so well with the Torah is because this still allows us to have exactly 6 days of creation, 6 24-hour periods, and a world that is only about 6,000 years old that we're living in right now. Meanwhile, this approach works with science too, because we don't have to reject any of the geological findings that we have had over the past couple years. We don't need to reject radiometric dating. We don't need to reject redshift when it comes to the age of the universe. We can accept that science is observing the physical universe, or to put it a slightly different way, science is reporting on what it would take to make a universe like this without God's divine intervention. Without divine intervention, it is quite possible that this rock that we are standing on right now takes 4 billion years to form, and that this universe that we are in takes roughly 14 billion years to form. Torah is willing to accept that. Fact is, that's not how God did it. God tells us himself in his holy Torah that he made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. He accomplished this incredible amount of work, billions of years of work, in just 6 days. Here we have no problem between Torah and science. The science we can embrace, the Torah we can trust, and a synthesis occurs between the two.
Okay, look. I understand the appeal of this approach. I really get it. It fits in with the conception of God. It fits in with the conception of, those of us who may not have that tether to science, that really want to remain, fervent really want to remain formidable in our understanding of that we are not anti-science, that we are pro-Torah, that we are pro-religion. But that's not the only path available. And I just have a qualm with this because he initially started with saying that you're twisting the Torah if you say that really day means billions of years, right? And then in the end, he says that clearly the Torah is showing us that God sped up a certain process here. It's like sort of fast forwarding to the creation of man. So what happens a few verses later, a few chapters later, when the Torah speaks about people who live hundreds of years? Is God all of a sudden just, was God not involved in there? Was everything just sort of being lengthened? Now I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that what you might respond to this is that, no, those verses, there was a change in the nature, and, those people actually lived that time. But what was pertinent, and when God got to the point of almost wanting to destroy the world, that's when people came back to live in their normal ages, and like the Torah's sort of telling you what you need to know until then. You're doing the same thing. You're twisting the Torah here as well. It's not a synthesis that flows as simply as you might think. Now, of course, my approach, if you read the Is the Torah True series, my approach is that truth is more complicated, and that approaching the Torah from this lens is actually succumbing to a very materialistic perception of truth. And I'm not against materialism. I'm not. I think that there is a strong basis for it. Of course, there's the hard problem of consciousness. I'm not going to negate that at all. I think I think that there is something about materialism which should at least be convincing to people who are aware of just the plethora of science that's out there. Um, but I'm also not convinced by materialism completely myself, I'll be honest. And it's not the only truth that exists. Abstract truths are, different types of truths. There are truths which are present in literature, in fictional stories. Not that I'm saying, not to show any of, I'm not saying the Exodus was a fictional story. I don't think that the Exodus was at least completely fictional. Am I more comfortable saying that about the story of Adam and Eve, that it's symbolic in some way? I am very comfortable saying that, and I have a basis for it. Maimonides says the exact same thing. He says these are prophecies, right? That are the result of Moshe's brilliant divine inspiration and nevuah and prophecy, but they're not literal in any way. That we don't have to view them as literal in order for them to retain their meaning. We can view them as an actual message from God to Moshe, which we do. We view them as an actual message from God to Moses, and it can still be quite powerful. And we sort of tend to feel like if something didn't literally occur, it somehow loses meaning. I think that's just poor education. I don't think that you need to be enamored with literal truths only, right? For me personally, I really enjoy Batman. Do I need Batman? Am I any less convinced that Batman is a powerful story because I know Batman is fake in a literal sense? Not at all. I think that I enjoy watching these fictional things, but true. They're true but fictional. And they have some sort of inspiration behind them, right? They're a commentary on humanity. And if we have a collection of stories, right? Adam and Eve, the story of Noah potentially, right? If we have a collection of stories that are also powerfully given to us by God to Moses through divine inspiration, which is what Maimonides explicitly gives license for, in volume 2 of the Guide for the Perplexed and in volume 3 a little bit, then why do we need to resort to trying to do this synthesis where we completely reinterpret our own paradigm? That's what we're doing. We're reinterpreting our paradigm. So if we're doing that, we might as well do it in a traditional way where we have a license to reinterpret literal events, seemingly literal events in the Torah, as an event that occurred in prophecy. Maimonides is clear that anytime an angel is mentioned, it's some form of prophecy, some form of message, and not something that occurred in literal history, right? He gets a lot of flack for it by other sages, who are reading his works, but that is a Geonic method. It's a method that was utilized by the Talmudic sages. The Talmud explicitly says that the Torah exaggerates, the prophets exaggerate, the sages exaggerate. This is in the Talmud. It's an opinion in the Talmud. And there is license for it, so I don't know why we're so scared to say this, right? The law, a halachic court, can still remain legitimate and can still, act in the Jewish world, in the Jewish home, just as powerfully as it did before we adopted this worldview. So, I'll be honest, I really tried to come into this video and I tried to give it a chance. And I said, he has a background in science. He clearly knows, he must know something that he's talking about in science. I'm not going to deny that he probably knows the science better than I do. But I think that we all have a certain way we were raised and a way we think about the Torah. Trust me, I was raised probably closer to his background than the rationalist background. And there's just an unnecessary path we take sometimes, and I think that the synthesis approach just raises more questions than answers for me. And I think there is another approach, but it involves understanding what truth is a little bit better, and involves being a little bit more philosophical. I hope that makes sense. I really hope this came off as respectful. The reason I'm passionate about this is because I want people who are rational, people who are bent toward rationality, to feel like they can be formidable in their Judaism and in their science and in their understanding and love of God and of human beings and of Jewish people, our Jewish brothers and sisters. It's important to me. And I feel like when approaches like this sort of get spread in the Jewish world, it sort of works for the audience it would have worked for anyway. And I think that there is another approach for the people who feel a little bit left behind, and this approach is available. And if you want more sources, I'm happy to discuss. Please send me an email, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you. And truly, if I said anything that comes across as disrespectful, I did not want it to come across that way. But when it comes to defending the Torah, you have to. When it comes to understanding the Torah, I just think that there is license for being direct, and I think that I was trying to be direct. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Share, subscribe, the whole shebang. Follow me on Instagram, Substack, subscribe, and on YouTube, obviously. If you like this video, share it. If you have any comments, please reach out to me on email. I'll be glad to have a conversation. All right, have a good one.